in a small home in Chennai, under a rusted ceiling fan that barely moved the humid air. A soft voice whispered stories of courage to a little boy. The voice belonged to Lakshmi Pichai, a woman whose strength lived not in loud commands or heavy hands, but in gentle guidance and one powerful rule. Her son, Sundar, sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes wide, not because of the story's ending, but because of the way his mother said one line, again and again, "Always choose clarity over noise," Lakshmi said. "If the world shouts, speak calmly. If life runs, walk with purpose, find your own rhythm." Sundar didn't understand the full meaning of her words back then. He only knew that when his classmates fought, he stayed quiet. When the world wanted attention, he listened. And when others mocked his silence, Lakshmi held his face and said, "You are not small for being quiet. You are deep." Their home was simple. No refrigerator, no telephone. They had to wait for their turn to use the neighbor's television. Sundar's father, Raghunatha, worked as an electrical engineer. He came home with dust in his hair and questions in his eyes. But Lakshmi, even after a long day preparing meals, always greeted him with peace. Sundar watched how she never let anger enter the house, even when the rice burned or the electricity failed. She lit the house with her attitude. One day, when Sundar was just 10, he failed a math test. He walked home slowly, his head down. The paper in his hand felt like a stone. He expected disappointment. But when he gave the paper to Lakshmi, she didn't scold him. She looked at him with a stillness that held more power than anger. "Did you try your best?" she asked. "I forgot the formulas," he whispered. "Then remember them, not for me, for yourself," she said. "What you do today teaches your mind what it's worth tomorrow." He didn't forget those formulas again, not because he feared failure, but because he learned something deeper that day. Effort was not about winning, it was about showing up with intention. As he grew, Sundar spent hours fixing radios and learning how things worked. His friends played cricket, but he often sat with broken circuits or old notebooks filled with sketches of machines. Other parents told Lakshmi she should push him to be more social. They said, "Your son doesn't speak much. He may fall behind." Lakshmi only smiled and said, "He's listening more than anyone." When Sundar got into the Indian Institute of Technology, their family cried. Not tears of sadness, but of a dream slowly unfolding. They didn't have the money for fancy clothes or travel tickets. They barely managed his fees. Lakshmi sold her gold bangles, those thin, round memories of her weddings, to help pay for the entrance. "Why did you do that?" Sundar asked, holding the little velvet box where the bangles had been. She held his hand and replied, "Jewels are not for keeping. They are for unlocking doors." At ITS Sundar faced a new kind of world: lewd, competitive, fast. The first few weeks were hard. He called home once from a borrowed phone. His voice cracked when he said, "I don't know if I belong here." Lakshmi answered with a steady tone, "Remember the rule. Don't become the noise. Become the signal." He stayed up late, worked harder than anyone, and slowly, silently began to stand out. Professors noticed how he didn't just give answers. He asked better questions. Classmates saw how he didn't fight for attention but earned respect with quiet clarity. Years passed. Sundar earned a scholarship to Stanford. He stood in an airport with a one-way ticket, a single suitcase, and a folded letter from his mother in his pocket. The letter said, "Dear Sundar, the world you are entering is big. It may try to change your rhythm. It may reward the loud and forget the kind. But remember, even the wind bends to the mountain. Speak when you have something meaningful to say. Be humble when you win. Be kind when you lose. And never forget clarity is strength." He folded the letter and placed it in his passport. And for years, whenever doubt crept in, he opened that letter and read it again. At Stanford, life moved fast. Ideas flew like sparks. Sundar worked day and night, sometimes skipping meals, just to solve a design problem. When he joined Google, he was just another engineer. But he remembered his mother's rule: don't be part of the noise, be the one who clears it. He noticed things others missed. He didn't argue to win. He listened, understood, and solved problems. When Android was struggling, he helped lead it. When Chrome was doubted, he built it. And when people asked how he stayed so calm in rooms full of pressure, he smiled and said, I had a teacher who believed stillness is not weakness. But not everyone welcomed his rise. Some felt he didn't deserve it. Some said he was too quiet, too soft, too humble. They wanted loud vision. They wanted bold slogans. Sundar gave results. And then came a day when he was called into a room filled with executives. The air was tight with tension. Google was about to choose its next leader. A voice asked, why should we trust you with the future? Sundar stood silently for a moment. Then he replied, because I don't chase the future. I build for it. Quietly, consistently, like my mother taught me. The room fell silent. Weeks later, he got the call. He was the new CEO of Google. When he told Lakshmi, she didn't shout or jump in joy. She only asked, did you remember the rule? Yes, he said. I always do. But the story didn't end there. A few months later, a meeting was arranged between Sundar and India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. It was to discuss the future of India's digital growth. Sundar was nervous. Not because of the status, but because of what the moment meant. Before leaving, he called his mother and said, what should I say to someone so powerful? Lakshmi replied gently, talk to him the way you talk to yourself when you are alone. Truth doesn't need a title. When Sundar sat with Modi, he didn't try to impress. He spoke about digital education, simple technology for villages, and how India could leap by lifting its rural youth. Modi listened carefully, and then he said something Sundar would never forget. Your mother raised you with wisdom. I can hear it in your words. Later, when Sundar returned to his hotel room, he sat quietly and looked out at the Indian skyline. The city lights flickered like stars, but none brighter than the memory of a woman who once sold her bangles so her son could study. In that silence, he remembered every moment, every rule, every quiet encouragement, every lesson whispered under a fan's slow turn. And in that moment, he realized something. Success is not just reaching the top, it's reaching back with humility. He picked up the phone and called home. Amma, he said softly. Yes, Sundar. Her voice came alive through the receiver. Thank you for raising me the way you did. I didn't raise you to be great, she replied. I raised you to be good. He smiled. That's the same thing, he whispered. Sundar Pichai sat in his California office, surrounded by sleek glass walls and digital screens. But his thoughts were far away, far from Silicon Valley, far from the buzz of investors, product launches, and algorithms. His thoughts were in Chennai, in that quiet kitchen where his mother, Lakshmi, used to hum while she cooked. She had no degree in leadership or psychology, but her one simple rule had shaped a man now leading one of the biggest companies in the world. Outside his office, meetings were being scheduled, files stacked up on his desk, and news headlines flashed his name. But inside, he felt something stir. Not pressure, not pride. Something else, something deeper. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, it was time to give back. That night, Sundar couldn't sleep. He walked outside under the clear California sky. Stars blinked above him like distant memories. He remembered his mother's voice again. If you grow big, don't forget the small, she had once said, while feeding a stray cat with leftover rice. You never know how hungry the world really is until you listen. The next morning, Sundar made a decision. He would visit India again, not just for conferences or political meetings, but to quietly return to where it all started, to walk the streets he once knew. Not as the CEO of Google, but as Lakshmi's son. Before leaving, he called his mother. "Amma, I want to come home. Not for a speech, just for a few days." There was silence on the line. Then Lakshmi replied, "The door is always open. Your room still smells like your books." When he landed in Chennai, there were reporters waiting, but Sundar had arranged everything quietly. No grand welcome, no public appearance. He stepped into an old taxi, the kind with torn seats and a rattling sound. The driver didn't recognize him. As the car moved through narrow streets, Sundar saw things both familiar and forgotten. Children played cricket with wooden sticks. Women carried water in large pots. Shopkeepers shouted offers no one really believed. Finally, he arrived at his childhood home. Nothing much had changed. The gate still squeaked. The paint on the walls had faded. But the moment he stepped inside, it felt like the safest place in the world. Lakshmi opened the door, her hands still dusted with flour. "You didn't bring security?" she asked. "No one follows someone who walks quietly," Sundar replied. They sat together on the floor, eating dosa with chutney. Sundar looked around. The fan was newer, but everything else remained. A photo of his father on the wall, the shelf with old books, the tiny temple in the corner. "Amma," Sundar said, "do you remember when you sold your bangles for my fees?" "I didn't sell them," she smiled. "I invested them." They laughed. But then Sundar grew serious. "I want to start something here," he said. "A school, not a big one. Just a place where kids can learn computers, English, and how to think. I want to name it after you." Lakshmi's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "Don't name it after me," she said. "Name it after the rule." Sundar looked at her. Clarity over noise. "Yes," she said. "Teach them that. The world is loud, but a clear mind is the strongest voice." The next few weeks were different from anything Sundar had done before. He visited schools and villages, sat with teachers, spoke to students. Many didn't even have electricity. Some walked 5 kilometers just to attend class. But he didn't give speeches. He listened. One day he met a boy named Arun, skinny, barefoot, and curious. "Sir, how does a computer speak?" Arun asked. Sundar knelt beside him and said, "It doesn't speak. It listens first." Arun blinked, confused. "Just like you," Sundar added. "It listens, it learns, and only then does it answer." Arun smiled, and for Sundar, that moment was more rewarding than any tech launch. Meanwhile, news had started to spread. Headlines whispered about Sundar's secret visit. And soon, a message came from New Delhi. The Prime Minister wanted to meet again, this time for a longer discussion on India's rural future. When Sundar walked into the Prime Minister's office, Narendra Modi greeted him not as a guest, but as someone who understood the soul of the nation. "You're building something quiet," Modi said, "and quiet things last." They talked for hours not just about technology, but about values, education, and the invisible power of good parenting. "Your mother raised a leader," Modi said. "She raised a listener," Sundar replied. "Leaders come and go. Listeners stay curious forever." After the meeting, Sundar was asked by several reporters to share a public message. He stood in front of a small mic and said something unexpected. "Don't focus on me. Focus on the children who don't have books. Focus on the villages without internet. I am just a reminder that greatness can come from quiet homes." The clip went viral. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Millions of people saw Sundar, not just as a CEO, but as a son, a student, and a silent strength. When he returned home that night, Lakshmi was waiting with warm tea. "How did it go?" she asked. "I spoke," Sundar said. "Did you shout?" "No," he smiled. "I whispered with clarity." They sat together in the courtyard, watching the sky turn orange. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a baby cried, and a temple bell rang. But inside that little home, Everything felt still. Sundar turned to his mother and said, "Amma, I think I finally understand your rule." Lakshmi looked at him, curious. "It wasn't just about how to speak," he said. "It was about how to live." She nodded gently, as if she always knew he'd figure it out. But just when things felt peaceful, a new storm was waiting. A letter arrived the next morning. It wasn't from a fan. It was from a school principal in a village Sundar had never heard of. The letter described a tragedy. A young girl had died while trying to reach her school by walking through floodwaters. Her village had no digital access, no bridge, no signal. Her name was Kavya, the principal wrote. She wanted to be an engineer. Sundar read the letter twice. His hands trembled. The words cut through him. He saw his own journey flash before his eyes. What if he had been born in a place where even dreams couldn't cross rivers? He showed the letter to Lakshmi. She looked at it for a long moment and said, "Sometimes, the signal must become the bridge." And in that moment, Sundar knew his mission had just begun. The morning after Sundar read the letter about Kavya, he couldn't shake the feeling from his chest. It wasn't just sadness. It was a mix of anger, urgency, and helplessness. A bright girl had lost her life, not because of illness or accident, but because there was no road, no bridge, and no access to simple education. He sat at the small wooden table where he used to study years ago. His hands rested on the same surface where his mother once placed a single notebook and said, "Start here." Amma. Sundar whispered, "How many more Kavyas are out there?" Lakshmi, who was quietly folding clothes, stopped and looked. "Up, more than we know," she said. "But one action can echo louder than 1,000 regrets." Those words stayed with him. By the end of that day, Sundar made a decision. He wouldn't just build schools. He would create a network, a bridge between forgotten places and the future. He called his team in California. The call lasted hours. "I don't want to pitch a product," Sundar told them. "I want to solve a problem." The team listened carefully. "What do you have in mind?" one engineer asked. "A low-cost solar-powered internet kit, small enough to carry, strong enough to reach remote areas, and simple enough to run with no training." The team was quiet for a moment. Then someone said, "We'll build it." While the engineers worked day and night on the prototypes, returned to his routine in India. But something had changed. He no longer walked with just curiosity. He walked with a mission. He visited Kavya's village. The journey was long and rough. Roads were broken. The jeep shook with every bump. But Sundar didn't complain. He looked out at the rice fields, at the barefoot children playing with stones, and he thought of the little girl who once dreamed of becoming an engineer. When he reached the village, the people were surprised. They had never seen a foreign car, let alone a global CEO. But Sundar stepped out without pride. He walked straight to the school, a one-room building with a leaky roof and no electricity. The teacher stood with a torn attendance book, and the blackboard had more cracks than chalk. "I came because I read Kavya's story," Sundar said softly. The teacher nodded with wet eyes. She never missed a day, even during storms. "He," whispered. Sundar sat down on the dusty floor with the students. Some had never seen a smartphone. One boy asked, "Sir, do you know how to make light come from wires?" Sundar smiled. "I know how to help you learn," he replied. He promised the village that they would be the first to receive the internet kit. The villagers clapped, but Sundar stayed humble. He knew promises meant nothing without delivery. Back in Chennai, the prototype finally arrived. It was small, looked like a black suitcase, and opened into a solar panel. Inside was a wireless hotspot, a battery, and a simple tablet interface. They named it Signal 1. Sundar held it in his hands and whispered, "This is for Kavya." Within days, he returned to the village and watched as the kit powered up under the sun. The device blinked blue. For the first time ever, the school had internet. Children gathered around the tablet. A girl typed her name for the first time. A boy played an English learning game. The teacher's eyes filled with wonder. "Sir," he said, "this is like magic." "No," Sundar said, "it's what should have already been here." News began to spread. Other villages sent letters. Parents wrote stories. Students sent drawings. Sundar read every one. Each voice pulled him deeper into his purpose, but not everyone was happy. Some corporate leaders questioned his choices. "Why are you wasting resources on places with no return?" one executive asked. "Because impact is not measured in money," Sundar replied. "It's measured in lives touched." Still, pressure grew. Investors asked for results. Some board members warned him that his attention was drifting from core business. Sundar took a walk one evening and called his mother. "Oma," he said, "the world is asking why I'm doing this." Lakshmi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you were not raised to count coins. You were raised to count hearts." Her words gave him strength. And the very next day, he made his biggest decision yet. He would not only expand the Signal One project, he would start a foundation, one that worked in silence. No ads, no big logos, just action. They named it Project Clarity. Its mission was simple: clear paths for forgotten minds. It started with internet kits, then came scholarships, then digital classrooms, then mentorship from Google volunteers. And then something unexpected happened. One of the girls from Kavu's school won a national science contest. Her name was Rich. She built a model that showed how to collect rainwater using recycled bottles. When asked who inspired her, she didn't say Sundar. She said Kavya, who couldn't be here, but her dream walks with us. Sundar watched her speech with tears in his eyes. Meanwhile, Narendra Modi invited Sundar again. This time, it was to discuss scaling the project across the country. In the meeting, Sundar shared maps, impact charts, and stories. Modi listened, then said, "You are doing more than connecting villages. You are connecting this nation to its future." Sundar smiled and replied, "I'm only following a rule my mother gave me. Find the signal in the noise." But things were about to change again. As Project Clarity grew, a large media house wanted to do a documentary. They promised to fund more schools if Sundar agreed to let cameras follow him. His team thought it was a good idea, but Sundar said no. "This is not a show," he said. "This is a seed, and seeds grow in silence." The media house pulled its offer. Some people called him too idealistic. Some said he missed the chance to promote the brand. But Sundar stood firm, and then something unexpected happened. A young journalist named Anaya, who had visited one of the villages helped by Project Clarity, wrote a powerful article titled "The CEO Who Listened." The story went viral. People from all over the world donated. Some offered land, some offered time, some offered skills. A quiet revolution had begun. Lakshmi read the article in her small home. She smiled, then walked to the old prayer room and lit a small lamp. He remembered. She whispered. But while the world praised Sundar, he never changed. He still ate on the floor when he visited home, still folded his clothes, still helped wash the dishes, and still asked his mother before making big decisions. "Amma," he once asked, "do you think I'm doing enough?" She touched his face and said, "You are doing what matters, and that is always enough." But deep inside, Sundar knew something was missing. A final piece. A way to make sure this mission didn't end with him. He needed to plant it somewhere it could live forever. And so, he began to plan something bigger than all his past work. A school not just for learning but for building leaders who listen. A place where every student would be taught the one rule that changed his life. The idea of a school that could change lives didn't come to Sundar Pichai in a meeting or in a dream. It came to him while sitting on the floor beside his mother. Lakshmi was peeling onions. The fan above them creaked. The television played. A quiet devotional song in the background. "Amma," Sundar said softly, "I want to build a school, not like the ones we see, Not with just walls and blackboards. I want it to be alive. Lakshmi paused and looked up. What do you mean by alive? Sundar leaned forward. I want to build a place where students are not told what to think, but taught how to think. Where they are allowed to speak softly and still be heard. Where curiosity is louder than fear. Where silence is respected. Where no one is forced to be the best, but everyone is guided to be good. Lakshmi wiped her hands and gave him a long look. Then she said something that stayed with him forever. Then don't build a school. Build a garden of minds. From that moment, the vision was clear. He called it the garden school. It would be built in a village, not a city. No fancy uniforms, no pressure for marks. Just a deep, strong focus on clarity, compassion, and curiosity. But building such a school in a rural area wasn't easy. When his team began scouting land, they were met with confusion. Why here? Villagers asked. Why not in a city? Sundar replied, because flowers bloom best when you water dry soil. He personally visited each possible site, walked through muddy paths, sat with elders, drank tea with farmers, and finally, he chose a small hill near Kava's village. The land had nothing but red soil, thorny bushes, and a view of the river. This is the place, he said, right here, where the earth still remembers silence. When the construction began, Sundar didn't return to California. He stayed in India. He wanted to be there for every brick, every plan, every step. He sat with architects and told them, no tall gates, no walls that scare. Make it open. Let it breathe. The classrooms were built with clay and solar panels. The library had large windows and soft rugs, not desks. Instead of a bell, the school would start each day with a moment of silence. The students would not stand in lines, but in circles equal united. Lakshmi visited the site one evening. She walked slowly around the half-built structure and said, "This is not a school. This is hope made of stone." But as the garden school took shape, challenges grew. A group of local politicians questioned the project. "Why are you doing this here?" they asked. "What's the benefit for you?" Sundar replied, "Not everything. Good needs to benefit the giver." Some tried to delay permissions. Some accused him of playing politics. Others claimed he was trying to change the education system without approval. Sundar stayed calm. He met with officials, explained his vision, answered every question with patience. And then he told them about Kavya. Her story changed the tone in the room. Even the most skeptical voices grew quiet. One officer said, "She died walking to school. Now this school will walk to others like her." But the biggest moment came during the school's opening ceremony. No ribbon cutting, no stage, no celebrity speeches, just the students, the villagers, Sundar, and Lakshmi. The first girl to enter the garden school was Ritu, the one who had won the science contest. She touched the earth before stepping in. Sundar stood at the gate, tears in his eyes. Lakshmi placed her hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Your garden has begun to bloom." As the students explored the new space, something remarkable happened. One shy boy, who had never spoken a full sentence in school before, raised his hand in the library and said, "Can I read out loud?" The teacher nodded. His voice trembled at first, but by the third sentence, he read with strength. Afterwards, the other children clapped softly, not because they were told to, but because they felt something. That moment captured everything Sundar had dreamed of, but life, as always, brings new turns. Just 2 weeks after the school opened, Sundar got a call from the United Nations. They wanted him to speak at a summit on global education, not just as a tech leader, but as a changemaker. At first, he was hesitant. He didn't want the spotlight, but Lakshmi said, "Sometimes, silence must speak. Not for fame, but for others to hear." And so, Sundar flew to New York. When he stood on the unstage, the world expected big numbers, big plans. Instead, he told the story of one rule. He told them about a woman who had no degree, but raised a leader. About Kavya, who never got to attend school safely. About Richu, who built a science model from recycled bottles. About the boy who read out loud for the first time. And then he ended with just one sentence. When we teach with clarity, we raise not just students, but better humans. The hall went silent, and then came applause, not of noise, but of respect. Back in India, the garden school grew. More villages joined, more teachers were trained, more children learned, not just math and science, but empathy, resilience, and peace. One day, a group of students wrote a letter to Sundar. It said, "Dear Sir, we don't know what CEO means, but we know what teacher means. Thank you for being our first one." Sundar framed that letter and placed it on his desk, not in his office at Google, but in his childhood home in Chennai. And yet, his journey wasn't done. A new challenge waited. Not from the outside world, but from within his own team. Some high-level voices in the company began to push back. "You are spending too much time on non-core efforts. We need you focused on quarterly results. What about product roadmaps?" But Sundar had changed. He called for a private meeting with the board, and said just one thing. "A company that doesn't grow with the world will one day be left behind by it. If we cannot connect to the smallest dreams, we do not deserve the biggest market." It was bold. It was risky. But it was true, and it changed the direction of not just his company, but how other tech leaders began to think. Soon, other companies launched rural tech projects. Governments began to discuss education differently, and people across the world began to ask, "What is the one rule I should live by?" For Sundar, the answer remained the same. Choose clarity over noise. In speech, in thought, in purpose, and most importantly, in action. But as the world celebrated, one final personal test waited for him. Something that would shake him more than anything before. A moment when he would have to choose between being a leader and being a son. A cool wind passed through the narrow streets of Chennai as Sundar Pichai sat beside his mother on the rooftop of their home. They had just finished dinner. The stars blinked above them like small, distant lamps. Lakshmi leaned back in her chair, her face calm, her eyes full of something deeper than pride. "Peace. You've done more than enough," she said softly. "It still doesn't feel like enough," Sundar replied. Lakshmi smiled. "You think that because you see what's left. To do that is a good heart's burden." But just a few days later, that peace was broken. Early one morning, Lakshmi fainted while preparing tea. The spoon dropped from her hand. The glass shattered. Sundar rushed into the kitchen and caught her before she hit the ground. They took her to the hospital at once. Tests followed. Hours passed in silence. Finally, the doctor came out. His face was serious. "Her heart is weak. Her blood pressure has been unstable for months," he said. "She didn't mention any pain." Voice was barely a whisper. "She never complains." The doctor nodded. "She may need surgery. It's not urgent yet, but we must monitor her closely. No stress, no physical strain." Sundar sat by her bedside, holding her hand. Lakshmi opened her eyes and smiled gently. "Don't look so worried," she whispered. "I'm not leaving just yet." But inside, Sundar felt something break. He had spoken to world leaders, made decisions worth billions, led thousands. Yet in that moment, he felt small, helpless, like the boy who once held his failed math test in his hands. He stayed in the hospital room that night. He turned off his phone. No emails, no meetings, just silence. As Lakshmi slept, Sundar looked at her face, the same face that had told him stories, corrected his words, shared wisdom over simple meals. The same woman who gave away her bangles for his education and never once asked for anything in return. He remembered something she had said long ago. "If I raise you right, I won't need to ask for help. You'll offer it before I speak. Tears filled his eyes. He realized now this was not a test of power or knowledge. It was a test of presence. In the morning he made a decision. He stepped away from his role for a short while. Not publicly, not with a press release. Just quietly. He gave day-to-day leadership to his trusted team, and stayed by Lakshmi's side. Some board members were confused. Why step back now, during such a critical time? He answered calmly, I've led teams, markets, and projects. Now I need to lead where it matters most, at home. And just like that, the man who had changed the world chose to sit in a hospital room with his mother, holding her hand, feeding her soup, reading her favorite books. She slowly recovered. Each day, she smiled more. Each evening, she asked about the garden school, about the students, about the Project Clarity updates. Ritu sent a letter. Sundar would say, she's building a solar car now. Lakshmi's eyes would light up. And Arun, he just taught his first coding class. Her lips curled into a proud smile. The seeds are growing, she said. But even as Lakshmi's health improved, Sundar began to think more deeply. Amma, he asked one day, what happens when you're not here? She looked at him gently. Then I will be wherever you speak kindly, think clearly, and act wisely. He lowered his eyes. But who will remind me of the rule? Lakshmi touched his chest. The rule is not mine anymore. It's yours now. That night, Sundar sat alone on the terrace. The stars were clear, and with them came a new thought. It was time to pass the rule forward. The next morning, Sundar recorded a personal message, not for a stage, not for media, but for the children of the garden school. He sat on a simple chair, no suit, no script. He spoke from the heart. When I was young, I didn't have much. I didn't know if I could ever be someone. But I had one thing: my mother's belief in clarity. Clarity is not just knowing what to say. It's knowing when to listen. It's not about being louder than others. It's about being stronger than the noise. Some of you may come from villages, some from small towns. People may laugh at your silence. They may ignore your dreams. But remember, silence can be powerful, because from silence, you hear the world better. And when you understand the world, you can change it. He ended with a quiet smile. That video was shown in every garden school classroom. Children watched it with wide eyes. Some cried. Some stood and clapped. And one small girl wrote a message on the board afterward. I will not shout to be heard. I will whisper with purpose. Meanwhile, Lakshmi's health stabilized. The doctor allowed her to go home. Sundar helped her walk slowly up the stairs of their old house. You should rest now, he said gently. Rest is for when hearts are heavy, she replied. Mine is light. But just as life settled again, something unexpected happened. A powerful business leader, known for his aggressive strategies, publicly criticized Sundar's recent work. He's too soft, the man said in an interview. Too focused on emotion. He's not making bold moves anymore. He's wasting potential. The comment went viral. Some agreed. Others defended Sundar. His team asked, should we respond? Sundar simply said, no. He went about his day, visiting a school, speaking with a teacher, sitting on the floor with a child, learning how to type. But that evening, he sat down with Lakshmi and told her what had been said. She listened quietly, then laughed softly. He sees kindness as weakness, she said, because he's never had to earn strength without shouting. Should I say something? Sundar asked. Lakshmi shook her head. You already did. The school, the students, the lives changed. That's your answer. And with that, Sundar knew. Silence was not retreat. It was power and peace. Still, deep inside, he wanted to do one last thing for his mother, one final gift. He began working quietly on something very personal, a book, not about success or business, a book titled, The Rule. It had no chapters about companies, no charts, no data. It was filled with stories about a boy who failed his test, about a mother who sold her bangles, about a home that had no refrigerator, but overflowed with wisdom. Each page carried a lesson. And on the last page, he wrote, "I was raised not by fame, but by faith, not by pressure, but by patience, not to conquer, but to contribute. Thank you, Amma. This is your story." He printed one special copy and gave it to Lakshmi. She read it slowly, her hands trembling. When she reached the last page, she didn't speak. She just held the book to her heart. And in that moment, Sundar felt something he had never felt before. Not pride, not success, but completion. The journey that began with one whispered rule had now become a path for thousands, but there was still one moment left, a moment that would bring everything full circle, and it came from a phone call. "Prime Minister, Modi would like to meet your mother," the assistant said. "Prime Minister Modi would like to meet your mother." Sundar read the words twice. He looked up from the phone. Lakshmi was in the kitchen, gently stirring a pot of dal. Her movements were slow now, more careful than before, but her spirit hadn't changed. He walked up to her and said, "Amma, there's someone who wants to meet you." She raised her eyebrows. "Someone important?" Sundar smiled. "Very." When he told her who it was, she paused for a moment, then said, "Does the Prime Minister have time for old women now?" "He said you've already done what most leaders only talk about," Sundar replied. "He wants to thank you." Lakshmi looked down at the spoon in her hand, then back at her son. "I'm just your mother," she said softly. "And that's why he wants to meet you," Sundar whispered. A week later a car arrived at their home. Not the usual black vehicle used for officials. This one was modest, simple, quiet, just like the guest it came for. Lakshmi stepped out, wearing her oldest cotton sari, the one she wore on Sundar's graduation day. She didn't wear makeup, didn't wear jewelry. She only carried the book her son had written for her. The rule, as they entered the meeting room. Prime Minister Modi stood up from his seat and walked toward her. He folded his hands in respect. Lakshmi did the same. "You raised a leader who never needed to shout," Modi said. "And now, he's helping raise a new generation of leaders." Lakshmi smiled. "I didn't raise a leader, I raised a listener." They sat together and talked not about politics or power, but about values. Lakshmi told him about Kavya, about Richu, about the barefoot children in the garden school, about how small voices must be protected, not ignored. "Strength," she said, "doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it stands in the kitchen, watching over a boiling pot." Modi listened quietly. Then he looked at Sundar. "Your success is rare," he said, "but your humility is rarer. India is proud of you not for your position, but for your purpose." After the meeting, a photo was taken. No fancy background, no forced smiles. Just Sundar standing beside his mother, holding the book, and behind them, a simple banner with 3 words. "Clarity over noise." It photo went viral. But more than that, it started conversations across the country. Students in remote villages began writing essays titled, "The Rule My Mother Gave Me." Teachers started morning prayers, not with chants, but with moments of silence and reflection. Parents began telling stories, not about marks and medals, but about kindness and character. The garden school expanded to 12 new villages. Project Clarity reached 5 new states. And Sundar, once just a quiet boy from Chennai, had now become a symbol not of success, but of silent strength. One evening, as Sundar sat beside Lakshmi, she handed him a letter. "This came for you," she said. It was from Arun, the boy who once asked how computers speak. He wrote, "Dear Sir, I now teach computers in 3 villages. The children call me Teacher Arun, but every time they ask how I learned all this, I say, I listened, then I learned. Just like Sundar Sir did. Just like his mother taught him." Sundar folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the rule. He looked at his mother. He said, you changed everything. Lakshmi smiled. I didn't change the world, she said. I just raised one boy well. That night, Sundar walked to the rooftop. The sky was clear. He closed his eyes and thought of everything: his childhood, his failures, his quiet victories, the rule whispered over meals, the letters from children, the schools filled with dreams, the Prime Minister's words, and the soft hands that once held his little fingers as he learned to walk. He breathed deeply and whispered, "Thank you, Amma." Then he turned and walked back downstairs. His journey wasn't over. There was more to build, more to teach, more to protect. But now, he wasn't walking alone. He walked with millions of voices, voices that didn't need to shout to be heard, voices that spoke with clarity. And as the world moved faster and louder, Sundar Pichai continued to do what he had always done: listen, learn, lead, and live by the one rule that changed his life: always choose clarity over noise. Years had passed since the first garden school opened. Years since Kavya's letter reached Sundar. Years since Lakshmi whispered that one simple rule. Yet even now, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in far-off villages and fast cities, that quiet idea lived on: clarity over noise. But something unexpected was happening, something Sundar hadn't planned. The children who had once learned from garden school were growing up. Ritu, the science-loving girl, was now an engineer. She built portable water-purifying machines and placed them in schools that still didn't have clean water. She gave them away for free. Arun, the boy who once asked how computers speak, had opened his own center, not for money, for students who had no place to go after school. He taught them the basics of technology and kindness, and others followed. They didn't all become engineers or teachers. Some became poets, some became nurses, some ran small farms with better tools, but they all lived by the same quiet rule. And slowly, without media attention or loud headlines, something began to shift in the country. Students raised their hands, not to show off but to ask better questions. Leaders in small villages started weekly silence circles to listen to community problems. Companies began looking for employees, not just with skills but with values. A quiet change had begun. And in the middle of it all, Sundar Pichai remained who he had always been: humble, focused, listening. He had returned to his role at Google, but with a new mindset. He encouraged his teams to look beyond profits, to create products for those who hadn't been seen before, to build tools for mothers, farmers, schoolchildren, not just for tech-savvy users. One afternoon, he stood in front of a group of young interns at the company. He didn't talk about innovation or quarterly growth. Instead, he shared this: my mother gave me one rule: clarity over noise. Today, we live in a world full of voices, notifications, opinions, speed. But if you slow down just a little and listen to the quiet spaces, you'll find what truly matters. Not what sells, but what serves. Not what grabs attention, but what gives purpose. The interns clapped, not because it was a dramatic speech, but because it was real. Meanwhile, Lakshmi's health had become fragile again. Her body was slower, her voice softer, but her mind remained sharp. On her birthday, Sundar brought her to the original garden school. It was a surprise. The children had decorated the entire courtyard with drawings of light bulbs, hearts, trees, and one line written everywhere: I am clear, not loud. When Lakshmi walked in, the students stood in silence. Then Rishu stepped forward and handed her a book. It was a handmade copy, titled, How We Remember Uma. Lakshmi. Inside were stories, drawings, and messages from students across the country. 1. Read, I never met you, but I feel like you raised all of us. Lakshmi opened the book slowly. Her hands shook. Her eyes watered. Sundar held her arm gently. Double quotes AMMA, he said. This is your story, multiplied by 1,000 hearts. Lakshmi looked around and said only 4 words. Then my life is full. In the weeks that followed, her health faded. She spent her last days at home, surrounded by love not just from her son, but from thousands of messages, letters, and visitors, who came from near and far. On her final night, she whispered something to Sundar. "You listened, I'm proud." She closed her eyes. And peacefully, she left the world. There was no big ceremony. Sundar kept it simple. He requested no media coverage. But still, the nation mourned. People across India lit candles. Some read a page from the rule in her honor. Some schools observed 1 minute of silence, not for grief, but for gratitude. Prime Minister Modi sent a message. Lakshmi Pichai may not have held office, but she shaped leaders. Her rule will live in India's future. Years later, when Sundar was asked what his biggest success in life was, he didn't say becoming CEO. He didn't say Chrome or Android or any product. He simply said, fulfilling a promise to my mother. He had kept her rule alive, not in books, not in buildings, but in people, quiet people, clear people, kind people, and in the end, that's what truly changed the world.